So welcome everyone to Numbers Therapy episode 32. Today's episode titled Loyalty Appreciation 2023 and Beyond. A couple of housekeeping points before we dive in. So this is the last episode of 2022. And so for the holidays, we'll have some giveaways going, as Poop mentioned. So make sure to keep your eyes open in the office hours chat. As a reminder, we're on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Catch all episodes you've missed on there, string them together for a holistic picture. Good experience, getting increasingly better. Very, very cool. Do continue to want feedback or thoughts. So if you have any thoughts, or feedback you have on the product in general, guests you want to see, anything else, please feel free to keep sending them through. And then lastly, we do have an application to be a guest on Numbers Therapy floating out there, and we allow this for both the person who refers and as well as the guest as well. So if you have somebody who you think would be great or a topic you think would be great that they cover, please feel free to reach out. And if you don't know where the form is, feel free to reach out to myself, Poop, and we can, of course, direct you. Talking through the frame here, the purpose of Numbers Therapy, of course, is to talk through the macro and oftentimes showcase the best in Web3, many of whom are in MVHQ and others even outside. We're going to be aggressively raising the level of the show. Get ready for 2023. It's going to be good. And today's show is going to serve as, I would say, a foundational pivot point in terms of how the show is going to evolve. So we're just going to start to see a wider variety of guests, more orientation towards, not just what we talk about with certain projects, but also where we think Web3 is going in general, and where it's evolving with pragmatic examples on top of it. But the goals will always remain, the same, which is ensure everyone understands how all the big pieces fit together and where the world is likely to go. Help everyone make better decisions with NFTs and other investments, including time investments, using a balanced perspective. Learn about different areas and opportunities and different ways of thinking, and also provide a sneak peek behind the curtain of our guests, often MVHQ guests, that helps give more context beyond what we normally hear. And so I always say as a reminder, the premise is always the same. The intent of Numbers Therapy is to cater to all levels. So different levels in here for the live and recorded audience. So it's important that everybody's along for the full ride. So for the live audience, if you have any questions along the way, lingo, acronyms, anything else, that's a benefit to you. So please make sure to not be shy and drop that in. I'm sure somebody or multiple people have the exact same question. So please feel free to drop that in and I'll make sure that gets answered. And then lastly, important note and disclaimer, none of what you hear in here is financial advice. It's all opinions. So without further ado, and onto today's guest and episode. Today's guest is an MVHQ OG and another person with a pretty interesting path. His pre-Web3 background, I think, will be particularly interesting to hear about. And yet he's found himself here, within this space. In his background, you'll see he has a good amount of experience touching a variety of industries, which I sense has formed his foundation for understanding different customer structures and needs. Building off of this background, he spent time in the strategy and agency space, helping craft one of the more notable Web 2 to Web 3 program bridges, which we'll talk about today. The program we'll be able to talk about was quite revolutionary at the time it was released in Web 2 for reasons maybe a bit unexpected. I remember when it was released, and it was definitely a different approach. And now they've carried that in conjunction with our guest's team to be a trailblazer into the Web3 space. So this is a really good use case and example of onboarding Web2 people into the world, and we're going to hear it front and center. He's become a recent friend, and I'm grateful we've gotten a bit of time to talk, and wish we had even more time to catch each other earlier, to be honest with you. Sometimes you get busy. I look forward to more evolving conversations with him. Today's episode will be a treat and lead our foundation of Numbers Therapy for 2023 and beyond. So please welcome Bunchu to the stage, everyone. Bunchu, how are you doing today?
Man, that's a fantastic intro. Thank you so much. I am pumped to be here with the MVHQ fam. It's been, MVHQ specifically was such a huge part of kind of my, what I call the degen hero arc that I've taken here in the last 2 years. So appreciative of everything that you guys do here, and super excited to chat.
Yeah. That degen hero arc has been certainly something that Mitch has done an excellent job of coining himself and leaning into totally.
Yes.
So certainly a badge of honor at this point. So let's start off with the username first. Sometimes I always get curious, or sometimes I get curious about where the background is. Where did Bunchu come from? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's actually funny. So my real name is Joe. Joe O'Rourke is my full name, but back in 2009, this nickname was given to me randomly, kind of at a family party. It was a 4th of July party, and it had to do. I can't even tell you exactly where it came from or why, but it became, the full name was Don Bunchu, and it became like this kind of Italian mafia alter ego thing that I had going in my family for a while. Like I was the Don, and and then with my friends started calling me it, and then it got shortened to Bunchu, and like Bunchu became this like alter ego personality that I had. He was the party animal guy, and he had this own kind of a life of his own. So it always stuck with me. And now all my friends refer me to that. It became my Twitter handle. And, my actual Twitter handle now, I don't know, whoever has the actual nickname or Twitter handle Bunchu, just straight Bunchu, has like 9 followers. They haven't tweeted since like 2011. I've tried to get that account, but it's funny, I got into crypto originally from like a sports betting background, and so I made my Twitter Bunchueths, and that's stuck with me. And now it's too late to change. There's no going back. So the world will know me by Bunchu from here on out.
I don't know who the person is who does that, by the way, who like hurries in to grab the account, right? Gets like the iconic name, and both doesn't use it themselves and also doesn't have any interest to like sell it or monetize. Like, I don't understand who that person is. I run into the same issue myself.
Of the earth. Yeah, it's so hopefully Daddy Elon will save me when I did see he was going to like free up millions of inactive usernames. So maybe I'll be able to go swipe it.
That would be amazing. Cool. So let's dig in a little bit to pre-Web3 backgrounds. I know your story is an interesting one. Before NFTs, Web3, what was your pathway? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So I came from kind of a traditional corporate sales and marketing background. I was a business major at Penn State University, and when I came out, I got a sales job, and my first sales job was in like payment processing, which if anybody's ever worked in that industry knows it's super cutthroat. It's very price driven sales, cutthroat tactics, all that kind of stuff. You could close a client and then lose them the next day, is all based on price, right? It's basically undercutting the floors of your services from company to company. And that was my first foray into kind of corporate sales. I hated it. I hated it so much. And at the time, that specific job, you were very much like anybody is a potential client. Like anybody who took credit cards at their business was a potential client. And so I was super into like craft beer and brewing my own beer at the time. And so I kind of made my niche in that job selling to bars and liquor stores because I wanted to hang out there. So that's kind of where I cut my niche in that job. And it kind of further developed my like interest and passion for craft beer. And so I decided I was going to go apply for every single craft beer job that I could find. Finally ended up getting a job with Sam Adams, the Boston Beer Company, back in 2011. And I was there for about 7 or 8 years and did the whole kind of corporate sales promotion route. I ended up with kind of district sales manager, regional sales manager roles there. And if anybody works or has worked in the craft beer industry, it's one of the most fun industries you could possibly work in. However, you find pretty quickly that there's kind of a pay top you hit, right? Like you hit the pay ceiling and there's really not too many places to go from there. So you have to make the decision if you love the lifestyle or you want to make some more money. I decided I wanted to make some more money. So I switched myself into a medical sales role and immediately regretted it because I hated that, and I realized I should have taken the lifestyle. So, but I was there doing post-acute sales as a regional manager for New York and Pennsylvania there for a very long, from 2017 to literally when I quit my job to go full Web3. And in that, it's funny when I look back on all those different positions I had in kind of sales, marketing, customer development, all of those kind of things. The reason I loved the craft beer job versus the other sales jobs, and then what I love about my role now in what I'm doing in Web3 is the ability to be creative in what I'm doing, right? When you were at the beer industry job, the Sam Adams, I was able to create kind of all these really cool customer experiences. If I wanted to, do an Oktoberfest Stein hoisting at a zoo, I could, right? And like that. So it was always giving me this creative outlet that I didn't really realize I loved so much until I was doing these other jobs where I didn't have it, right? And so like when I sit here and reflect on kind of my career path and like what I love about this space so much, and it's definitely that piece of it. So that's my pre kind of Web3. So I was always sales, marketing, and then just in my personal life, I was a collector, right? So specifically during COVID, right, I got very back into, as many of us did, like collecting the things that we loved when we were kids, right? Like sports cards, they were booming at the time. And, some physical sports memorabilia and all of that kind of stuff. So I came from like a collector background from a hobby standpoint as well, which I think has obviously played into, my love of NFTs and things like that, and where we're kind of going with what we're doing with not only Starbucks, but Forum 3 as well. So that's kind of the full circle story of my background there.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's the fact that you recapped it kind of afterwards and post-mortem, and the fact that you wanted connection to the customer and creativity and all those things, and your collection side of things, like it totally intersects and makes sense. What was that transition like for you, though? To go to your role now. How did you hear about it? How did you land there? You find your partner? Like, how did that come about?
So I have like the craziest story. This is a results atypical, do as I say, not as I do type of story on how I got here. So I got into crypto in 2017. My first purchase of Bitcoin was May 2017. I think the price was like $1,500. And as I mentioned before, I got in through sports gambling. Like it was at a time where, the banks wouldn't let you deposit on these offshore books, and you had to go find other methods. And you were either doing like shady Western Union shit, or you were, or you had to like start accepting that, like the books started accepting Bitcoin. So that's when I got on Coinbase initially. And I've, at the time, Coinbase only had Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum on it. And, but I started kind of like diving down the rabbit hole then around this stuff, right? And so there wasn't really even crypto Twitter at this time. It was like you got all of your information from Reddit message boards. So like our Ethereum like is where you kind of hung out and got your info. And it's a weird place over there. If you've ever been over there, you know what I'm talking about. But then in 2018, I like I said, I dove down the rabbit hole there and kind of never came out. In 2018, I started a podcast, a crypto podcast it's called Wrecked Podcast. It is now defunct as the crypto podcast, but it has turned into what we do now. But I started that podcast with my co-host Chamber. We've been doing podcasts together in the space for now 5 years, and in a very Web3 internet relationship fashion, we've been doing this podcast together for 5 years and never met each other. So super interesting kind of fun fact there. But we started Wrecked Podcast. We were interviewing all these people in the space. We, if anybody's been around like from those days in crypto, we had like John McAfee on our like 6th episode ever, which was really interesting. And but so that was kind of my foray into crypto. And then I first learned about NFTs in 2018 because in crypto Twitter, the first kind of like use case, if you will, to call it that, came around where people were initially doing ERC 721s, and this thing popped up called Crypto All Stars, and it was, if you like Google it, you'll go read an article on it, and it's like the most Ponzi thing you'll ever see. It was basically trading cards made of your favorite crypto Twitter influencers that were, when you bought it, it was immediately listed for like X amount of percent higher. And it was just like this hot potato thing. But immediately I kind of got the value of that. And I saw this like immediate inherent value in owning something digital, especially in like the form of a trading card, right? Because it was something that resonated with me so much as like a physical collector. And so in 2018, it's so funny, like when I look back on this stuff now, as you said, like do this post-mortem, and I literally erased this from my memory until about 6 weeks ago when somebody asked me this on a podcast as well. But like I wrote a one-pager in 2018, early 2018, about like a proposal to create a NFT art marketplace. And it was like 2 months into like when OpenSea launched, and I'm like sitting here kicking myself now, obviously. And but anyway, obviously nothing happened with that, but it just, you know, part on my journey of, you know, why I loved NFTs so much and how kind of I found value in it very early. And then so we took that crypto podcast in 2021 and we converted it to the podcast we do now, which is called The Mint Condition. I started a kind of media company around NFTs with my partner and Chris Jordan and NFT Bark, if you've seen them on Twitter. And we co-founded the DGen Network together. And so now in 2021, we're creating all this content, kind of putting our thoughts out. And I was super deep in at the time to Axie Infinity. And I was like all on this play to earn kick. And partially like in here in MVHQ and stuff, we were all talking about Axie, and I had made these huge guilds that with my podcast co-host, and we had, you know, like 100 teams going at the time. And so I was just kind of like live tweeting about what I was doing. And if anyone's familiar with the project Knights of DGen or Redbeard Ventures, Drew Austin, he, you know, he's kind of a VC / project founder in the space. He DM'd me one day and he said, and all this time, by the way, this is all side stuff that I'm doing. I'm still working my medical job and things like that. And he DM'd me one day and he's like, "Hey, I saw your tweets on Axie and I've been like wanting to learn about play to earn. I'm having this get together at my house in Warwick, New York. I'm inviting a bunch of people. I'd love for you to come and like talk to us about it." And I was like, all right. And he's like, "Here's who's coming." And it was like people that I legit felt like I didn't belong in the same room as. Like the Vaynerchucks were going to be there, and you know, like Mike Dudas and the founders of Bored Ape Yacht Club were on the list and everything like that. And I'm like, all right. So I very immediately recognized that this was something that I needed to be at. I was like, all right, when is it? And I'm like, what weekend? I'll be there. He's like, no, it's like next Tuesday. And I'm like, okay, well, I was scheduled to be in Pittsburgh for my job. And I was just like, you know what? This is a once in a lifetime thing. I quit my job that Friday and went to his house and got there, and you know, all these guys are there. I'm kind of like starstruck. Ja Rule is at the table, like the table, just like smoking a joint. But he then, so like at this party, I met Adam Brockman, and Adam Brockman is my co-founder at Forum 3. He's the former chief digital officer of Starbucks and former co-CEO and president of J. Crew. And he's got, you know, he's the one that's kind of originally responsible for the current Starbucks mobile order and pay and all of that kind of stuff, and current loyalty program that, you know. And him and I hit it off. We talked for like 10 hours that day, a lot about Axie Infinity and these concepts around play to earn and how NFTs can be used to do all these things. And the next week we formed Forum 3 and we started this little business together, and the rest is kind of history. So I ended up quitting my job to go to this party, and it paid off, but I would not recommend people doing that. Results atypical, but that's why I call it like the DGen hero arc, because I was just around, making content, slinging JPEGs, and I took a risk, bet on myself, and I think got, maybe a little bit lucky.
It's clear that there was like this tension between your corporate job, right, and what you were doing at night, and obviously you were drawn more to that. Like that was very, very obvious. On the same token, like I don't think you needed to quit your job just to go to this party. You could have just simply taken off Tuesday. Well,
it's funny because I during COVID, like my old job was I was traveling overnight 3 days a week, and away from my wife. We were about to have a kid. And then like after COVID, when you start like going back to that life that you had prior, I didn't realize how much I hated that until like I didn't have to do it. And then when it was time to go back, I was dreading it so much because like I had started these other side hustles and building all these other income streams. And I was finally like making money for myself. And once you start, I'm sure people in here have this feeling, like once you start making money for yourself, you kind of get the itch to like never go back, right? And so that was the internal struggle I was having, right? Like I had a really great job and I just fucking hated it. And it was making me miserable. And so so you're right, but I had kind of stacked and prepared myself by creating all these different income streams, both, with the podcast and NFT trading at the time and Axie Infinity and all these other things that I was doing. I like started an Amazon business. Like I was hell bent on getting out and being self-sufficient. And that was kind of like the sign at the time for me to be like, all right, time to take the leap.
I mean, I think the revenue streams like you had, plus the instant, partner/support network, right? The fact that you were pushing at it together, that's it, right? Those are doing something you love, like those are the ingredients right there. So that's totally makes sense. Absolute no brainer. Let's transition a little bit to Starbucks, and let's talk about that a bit. Certainly want to spend, the majority of our time, because I think it's a really, really good use case that we should talk about. Let's maybe start with the Web 2 side of things and frame that side first. From what you remember, and I'll certainly fill in context too, because I remember when this released, but what was the context with Starbucks with their existing program that they had at the time? Like, what can you share in terms of what their program was before we started to head in the direction of Web3?
Yeah. So obviously, my business partner, Adam, is kind of the one that pioneered this entire program. And he was the chief digital officer at Starbucks. And it's funny when you hear him talk about it, at the time, like chief digital officer was kind of like an embarrassing title because it was the new thing. It didn't exist. It's kind of like, we're seeing now with head of Web3 or like, head of vibes kind of stuff. Like 10 years from now, it'll be a common thing. But at the time it didn't exist. And so, he talks about it in such a way where it's like, he's just trying to push, ways to be innovative with customer engagement. And so like he even talks about it as like the first big thing that they launched was actually like, and it sounds so silly now, but free Wi-Fi in Starbucks, right? And it was actually controversial for them to do that because people at the time in the corporate or in the corporation were like, well, no one will be able to find a seat, and why wouldn't we make them pay for this and all this stuff? And so like it just goes to show like something like free Wi-Fi at some point in history was a controversial thing. So, when it frames that as like, yeah, we're at the very beginning of something that might be, super common as we look back 10 years from now. But, and then he talks about how he initially created this loyalty program, and it really all stems around the customer engagement, customer retention from, and all stemming from like this mobile experience, right? So this is when they kind of pioneered this mobile order and pay type of program. And then obviously the stars that you see now in the current loyalty program where, and I think the framework for this conversation is like, what is a current Web2 loyalty program? Like, what does it look like? And then what can it be in the future? And, when you look at something like the Starbucks loyalty program as it is today, it's very linear. It's very transactional. It's you as a customer give me incremental visits and incremental spend for incremental discounts. And it's very linear. It's very transactional. And what's crazy is it's also, expensive at some point. When you get to a scale like Starbucks has for a loyalty program, you're talking there's 27 million active users over a 60-day period on Starbucks loyalty program. You can imagine the discount line gets very big at some point, right? As far as like billions and billions of dollars of discounts that they're giving. Mm-hmm. And so when you think of how that can scale further, it kind of hits this diminishing returns at some point. Like there's no other way, or you hit this wall of how you can actually reward people. And what's also interesting is Starbucks has this incredible research that they've done on like what their customer actually wants. So like when we went into Starbucks for the first time to like meet with all of the like cross-functional teams, the loyalty team had all this crazy research that they had done, like literally face-to-face research on, what they want to see the loyalty program become. And it was very much around like all of the Web3 ethos things that we talk about now, like community, closer relationship with the brand, very much identity-based stuff, and things that you can't just do out of a straight discount line, which was really interesting. So when we went in there, they kind of said to us, hey, we've been looking to do something like this, like a next generation loyalty, elite loyalty status for a long time. And so it was a natural fit. And I'm sure you can fill in some blanks on like the history of that loyalty program before we get any further. But like that's kind of the progression that we had and the framework of how we could think about it to start versus the Web 2 versus Web 3.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Very, very, very logical what you're saying, and definitely fits together. So yeah, I'll fill in a couple things for the crowd that's listening, right? So first off, when Joe's talking about linear, and transactional, right? It's you pay money, you get stars, right? That's how it functions right now. But if you think about all the different ways that people can add value, right? Interacting with things, providing feedback, there's a whole host of ways that customers can provide value beyond just transactional spending money. And so I think, that's what he's referring to in terms of all of their different, not having just a linear program, but having a truly dynamic one. The program he's referring to, launched by some numbers, we're numbers therapy here, launched in 2009. It was relatively innovative, but the more innovative and interesting thing about Starbucks loyalty program when it came out at the time was Starbucks is a bank at the end of the day. They have more money in deposits via loaded gift cards than many banks do, which is very, very fascinating, but also ties into what you're saying, Joe, which is it's very transactional, right? And so totally understand what you're saying. And the fact and the costs and all those kinds of things. A couple other terms just to introduce to the crowd in case not familiar. Breakage is one concept that's very common in loyalty programs. So the expectation that some people will earn rewards or stars and never use them, right? So that means that the place gets incremental behavior, right? More purchases, retention, all those things, but then don't have to lose the cost because people are redeeming their rewards. And a related concept to that is achievement as well, which is what happens, when you die or something happens to your rewards. But even with that, right, like he's pointing out, these are expensive programs that don't fully account for all the cool Web3 things that exist and all the cool ways. MBHQ is a perfect example of that, of all the ways that people can contribute and add value, media side, all these things. It just could be so much more dynamic than that. And I think this is just a perfect example of a very antiquated, good at the time, but antiquated loyalty program that was more transactional and the opportunity to be able to expand on it. So,
Joe, I think you touched on an interesting point there about like not only will customers kind of be able to add some value to this program, but Starbucks itself is going to be able to add value back to their customers in a way that they've never been able to do before, right? And so I tell the early play to earn part of this story, like how Forum 3 got started and how, my journey started, because at the end of the day, what we've kind of created here with Starbucks Odyssey is a form of play to earn game, right? In the sense that what we've created is a experiential loyalty game. And where I always point back to the beginning of this with play to earn and my experience there was what we've seen in a lot of these play to earn ecosystems that many of you are probably so familiar with is they become very extractive, right? The actual value of the ecosystem and then the ecosystem is funded by the customer and not the platform. And so what ends up happening is everybody is extracting value rather than adding value. And it becomes that's how it becomes the race to zero on a lot of these tokens and things. But when you frame the same type of ecosystem with a brand that is massive like Starbucks, that has marketing, funding, partnerships, all of these things, and they're the ones funding the ecosystem, well, now you actually can create what I think a lot of these play to earn games end up or originally try to do, right? So I call it we talk about it as Starbucks has all this intangible brand value that they have. They are one of the most recognizable companies in the entire world. They have connections to artists, companies, you name it. They could collaborate with anybody, get a meeting with anybody on the planet, and everybody wants to work with Starbucks. And in a Web 2 way, like this just transactional stars for spend, there's no way to pass any of that down to their customer. And on these kind of Web3 rails, when you have specific ownership and digital asset creation at your fingertips, and you kind of take all of that to the next level, and you could see a world where, Starbucks is partnering with Alicia Keys to create a never before heard track that is going to be airdropped to holders of Odyssey that reach a certain level as a reward. It'll double as a ticket to one of her concerts, or an access pass to a Starbucks roastery experience or something like that, right? And so you can see kind of how that customer interaction and engagement is completely different than what we just set the stage with, right?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so maybe a couple tactical things, and feel free to not answer if you can't talk about it, disclose those sorts of things. Starbucks being, brick and mortar, right? And what it is. Since we're gamifying this experience, any plans that you know of to integrate augmented reality into this, for instance? That's one.
So I'll preface all of these questions with Forum 3's relationship is an advisor to Starbucks and the strategy kind of consultant and implementer and all of that. So everything I answer here comes from that lens. And so I don't speak directly for Starbucks when I'm answering these questions, but I will do the best to answer them as I can. And so your first question there, I 100% think that that's going to be coming, right? They see the value in this program kind of bridging this digital physical. There's a lot of really cool stuff that is out there with this kind of AR experiences that they could take into real life. And if any of you have access to the Odyssey platform yet, you can kind of see where it might start in just the very beginning journey. There's this one that takes you out to this virtual tour of the Costa Rica coffee farm. And it's like a Web 2 version of that tour, but you can very clearly see how it could become something different and much more immersive. And so I would say 100% that's kind of an angle that we're advising them to do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Another tactical question, especially as we're trying to bridge this gap from Web 2 to Web 3, right? Web 2, Starbucks has all these users, many of whom are not Web 3 users at all, right? I mean, like the majority of the population. So we're trying to bridge that gap. Any sense of, I'm sure you have the answer, but whether they're planning to use Web3 native terminology in there as well? Are we going to hear terms and words of wallets, tokens, things like that? Or are they going to use intentionally, or NFTs, like intentionally veer from that because of some of the black eye things that have happened, in the past 6 months, year kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say if you do feel like they're steering away from it, it's not because of like the connotation necessarily, right? So like if you saw any of the early kind of press releases that came out about it, they're calling like the earned NFTs that you'll be getting for like completing these journeys, they're calling them stamps, right? So but when they actually talk about it in the press, like they have parentheses NFTs. So they acknowledge that they're NFTs, but they are using a terminology and calling them stamps. And they, the other pieces of like the Web3 terminology and Rails here is like this concept of wallets. So one of the big things that we felt that we needed to do is really make an experience that was user friendly for the Web 2 not crypto native person, right? So as I mentioned before, the Starbucks loyalty program has 27 million, 60-day active users. The amount of those people that are Web3 native are slim, right? So it was super important for us to create an experience that it has both a custodial and self-custodied option, right? So like they'll refer, we partnered with the Web3 kind of Rails piece of this with Gemini Nifty Gateway because they are a leader in this kind of custodial, they were kind of a pioneer in that custodial minting space. They're backed by, Gemini, obviously. So it felt like a very good partnership for, Starbucks to have. So they're actually the ones doing the custodial side of the platform that you'll see. They'll have their own marketplace that's powered by Nifty Gateway. However, you will be able to do external wallet connect, pull your self-custody your assets, trade them on the open marketplaces and things like that. So as far as like what the customer facing terminology is, they're calling the earned NFTs stamps, but they are acknowledging that they are in fact NFTs, and they will refer to wallets in the sense that you'll have a Nifty Gateway custodied wallet, and then we kind of see it as almost like the top shot moment of this kind of cycle where many of us kind of came into this space in 2021 through Top Shot, and we kind of all graduated ourselves into Ethereum, right? And so that's kind of the way we view it here, where we're going to provide the rails for people to graduate into self-custody. It's going to require a lot of education around what that is. Like, I think Nike's doing a good job of that now with onboarding people into .swoosh, and we're going to try to do the same thing there.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's amazing and super impactful, right? I mean, we should, the thing that should stand out here, of course, is 20 plus million users. But as a result of 20 plus million users, the line that, that they and you guys have to toe is make sure it's accretive to the current experience that exists. So as a result of that, what I would envision is the mobile experience stays relatively similar and familiar, knowing that the vast 99.9% majority of program members are not Web3 centric, right? Web3 native thus far. And this gets kind of layered in over time with kind of a slow path. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So like what you actually see for Odyssey right now is a totally mobile friendly web app, right? So it's actually built on, a browser web app, but it is totally mobile friendly. It has direct integration into your Starbucks rewards account. So, when you can actually kind of build these customer journeys that interact directly with your rewards account. So when you're doing stuff in store, you're getting credit on Odyssey, vice versa. And so that's pretty cool and important integration to have, because like you said, you can see a very easy path over time on how those two worlds mesh, right? And so I think you will see over the next, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years that if the Odyssey program is successful, there's going to be a deeper merge of the two programs.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think there's just such an amazing opportunity for them here. Certainly you can see it already in the brand, right? It's a great job with the brand of Odyssey, but even beyond that, right? Such a cool opportunity for Starbucks, a brand that, like, under normal circumstances probably had like moderate brand equity. Like, people like them. They're a little bit, good, a little bit expensive, good digital experience, but not like, nothing special. Not like, this isn't Nike Supreme, that kind of brand equity, right? And all of a sudden they can just slingshot as a result of this. I can almost envision, like, can Starbucks land in a place where they become so cool and integrate these things so much that all of a sudden we can see like Starbucks co-branded streetwear that's coming out because it interacts with Web3? Like, is that a possible pathway here at some point?
I would say anything's on the table. Like I said, we see that as a huge opportunity at Form 3, like, to do some really cool stuff with that, as far as like, branded merch type of stuff that is actually interactive with your Odyssey account, with AR, with stuff like that. We see that as a possibility. So, what I would say on top of that, though, is like the actual lift to get something like Odyssey off the ground at a brand like Starbucks is so immense. So like, we at Form 3 kind of sometimes feel like we're moving at light speed, and we have to sometimes take a step back and realize that all of these really awesome, next steps of Web3 things are going to take some time. But I definitely think that they definitely see the value in that. Let's put it that way. And so, and what's super interesting, though, like, just to come back to like the numbers of users, is, I don't know if you've ever played. Have you ever played Starbucks for Life?
Yeah, I have.
So Starbucks for Life is not too different than like what, in concept of like what Odyssey is going to be, in the sense that like Odyssey or Starbucks for Life is kind of like this Web 2 version, right? You're doing things in store through your Starbucks rewards account, but you're earning these little badges. And if you earn enough badges, you're getting to, you're winning prizes and things like that, right? And so it's not crazy different than an Odyssey type concept. But the interesting point, the differentiation is like, that's a 1 month program that Starbucks runs that gets 3 to 6 million users over the course of that 1 month, and then it just goes away, right? Like, and so when you think like, okay, what does that have to do with Odyssey? Well, imagine now like an always on version of Starbucks for Life.
It makes no sense that it would only be a few months, right? Like, it's a concept that has total constant application to a brand that's integrated into people's lives constantly.
Totally. And so you can see this as like this building block of all this cool stuff where, you might see, and one of the questions that we answer a lot is like, why does this have to have a blockchain component, right? And so what's interesting there is like, if you think of the difference between the Starbucks for Life and what Odyssey is going to be, is like, there's so much room to build upon this, in a sense that like, you may see down the road like Starbucks do affiliate journeys with other brands, with other creators, with other artists, things like that. And that stuff doesn't happen easily in a Web 2 platform, right? Where like you're seeing Starbucks partner with companies like Delta, and those are super heavy lifts from a tech perspective when you think of how they have to integrate the customer databases. But when stuff's on a blockchain, as this thing grows and more people are holding tokens and things like that, the collaborations become so much easier to do and so fast, right? Where you could kind of do these things on the fly, almost in real time. So I think that's a super interesting thing that, I'm not even sure that like most people realize that superpower that unlocks, because you're kind of creating this almost like multiplayer, multi-brand game inside of Odyssey at some point.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I assume what you're referring to is Delta Sky Miles Earn.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, it's totally powerful. What about, is there a consideration in scope for a Soulbound token as a base layer here? Because I can't imagine the activity and behavior that somebody's going to have and what they're going to earn. Parts of that, have to be attached to the customer profile at the end of the day, right? Has the Soulbound token been talked about at all?
Yeah, we've talked about it in some specific use cases, like .swoosh, I believe, is they're minting their like swoosh IDs as Soulbound tokens. We've actually did talk about doing that at some point, and it just didn't make it into like our first like cut of what we wanted to put out. We mostly from a speed factor. So there's definitely been talk about it. I think we need to explore kind of like what the true power of that is. Like where I see it being super valuable is like you said, with this kind of ability to take your Starbucks earned activities and partner with other ecosystems, or take that with you to other ecosystems, right? And it's so it's more than just buying or like trading your points and trading your NFTs. Then it's like you're actually building this lifetime profile of Starbucks brand loyalty that sticks with you. So because there is going to be an aspect of like this lifetime score, right? So you'll do actions throughout the calendar year, but then you'll be building this like lifetime Starbucks score, right? So you could easily see a connection between that and something Soulbound, in which those activities are baked into your metadata, and you can kind of be token gated into different experiences based on that, or sky's the limit really. But so there is we definitely have talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, what's so great about that is there's analogs there, right? First off, with million miler status, those kinds of things. But then on top of it, the predictability also, right, of being able to maybe surprise and delight you, knowing what your history is, what your trajectory is. It'll probably give like insight in terms of product feedback. It could do just so many things by having that data. Web 2 or Web 3, I would say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very, very cool. One thing I just want to touch on one thing too that I want to make sure is not overlooked in our conversation. Then we kind of can get to just where Web3 is heading in general. But before we get to that, just one element here that's I want to make sure it doesn't get lost in the shuffle is the internal sell-in process that exists too, right? So for you guys, obviously you had the former Starbucks chief digital officer, as your partner in this case. That certainly helps things, but that's not the current digital officer, right? And on the same token. So what was that sell-in process like, and how have you been able to mobilize this so well, when many Web2 brands are having some challenges? And then what do you think the normal sell-in process would be like for most Web2 brands, for instance, in contrast to Starbucks?
Yeah. So I'll take this in like two parts. One, I'll preface it with saying that there's an element of luck that we had here in the way that this all transpired, right? So obviously you have Adam, who has this incredible relationship and with Starbucks that has this inherent layer of trust built in. But when Adam tells the story, it's pretty funny because he right after around the time like Bored Apes minted and stuff, he wrote an email to the current CEO and kind of said, hey, you should look into this and build it as an experiential layer on top of your current loyalty program. And nothing really happened. And so it was kind of like, yeah, cool idea, we'll look into it. And then at the same time, like Howard Schultz, who's the founder of Starbucks, and he had previously been the CEO one other time after that he'd come back, and but he wasn't the current CEO at the time. And so but Adam and Howard have a very close trusted relationship. So Howard was kind of paying attention to what we were doing at Form 3, and we had kind of like more or less red pilled him on like what was going on in Web 3. And he's like, man, this is super cool. And so he kind of wanted to get involved with Form 3. And then totally serendipitously, it ended up that he went back to become the CEO of Starbucks again for the third time. And at that time, he had kind of pulled Adam aside and was like, hey, come back and do this for us. And Adam was like, thank you, but we're doing some cool stuff at Form 3. And he's like, well, let's do it through Form 3. And so like that's how we that's how we ended up doing this, but we had, to answer your question, is like we had it from the very, very top down. And if you don't have it from the top down, it's a much harder sell. Like we had to do, this. Howard came back and this was an initiative, and he went out and said that we're going to do this by the end of the year. I believe this is like a really, innovative thing that will take our loyalty program to the next level. And so it was kind of like, mandated there. And the hard part that we had was kind of finding the fit and selling it into all the other teams, the trickle downs, right? So there's a lot of education that went out there, or that we had to do. And so like what this looks like in the future, I think is, and I think what we're doing with Starbucks and what Nike is doing is going to make this easier in the future, because they're going to have proof points to point to, right? You're going to be able to say, well, look what Odyssey is doing, or look what .swoosh is doing. And people are going to say, oh, I want to do that. But it's very hard for them to like pioneer something like this. And Starbucks is like the perfect company to do it, because they've kind of been pioneers in the tech and loyalty space for stuff like that for a long time. And so it was a natural fit. But like you said, it's scary for every other company out there, right? Like, but I think, with these proof points, you're going to see it become an easier sell in, because I think what we're going to demonstrate here is a different type of use case for NFTs than what people have seen over the past year and a half, right? Like you mentioned, the black eye on the term NFT and stuff. And, us in here, we're all very familiar with the financial piece of NFTs as far as a trading tool and things like that. And, but that's the scary part to a lot of these brands. But now if you can have these programs to point to and say, no, this is a customer engagement model. This is an experiential loyalty model. This is an access pass. This is a brand pass. This is how we reward our most loyal customers, and we can program to them, and we can connect to other brands this way and become more relevant. And like you'll have these points to prove, you'll have these proof points to point to. And I think that's where we'll see kind of this next generation of what NFTs are going to be used for as we kind of look forward.
Yeah. I mean, there's this there's just awesome opportunity. And I feel like I agree with you 100% in terms of the curves. And I feel like what's getting lost here a little bit to some extent is like with these other brands that are a little bit too gun shy, right? Maybe just not spending enough time to delve into this. All the things that we see, those listening live right now, those who are listening, unrecorded, all the things that we see, are all the potential that you're talking about. But on top of that, those brands that move early, like what Starbucks is doing right now, like they're going to capture just a disproportionate amount of brand equity. Yeah,
totally. It's funny. Like part of the quote unquote criticism when we were first talking about this was like, well, why would you use a blockchain for something like this? Wouldn't Starbucks want to own all of the data? And why would you allow like Dunkin' Donuts to come and vampire attack your holders? And I'm thinking to myself, like, well, that'd be a great thing for both Starbucks and an Odyssey holder, right? You're getting value added to you as a Starbucks customer. And where are you going to assign that value? You're not going to assign it to Dunkin' Donuts. You're going to assign it because you were a Starbucks holder that you ended up with this additional benefit, right? And so like it's about like this public owning of your data, where it's like, and it's capturing the relationship first, like you just said, right? It's like they're going to own that relationship, and anybody that comes and tries to, vampire attack it, the value will be assigned back to where they originally, like the reason they got it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's just going to be very powerful and very sticky. I'm super excited about it. Yeah. Certainly the ways that you've talked about and we've talked about on this episode, and then the many other cool things. I mean, it's just very, very exciting, to be honest with you. And it's cool to see, a brand like this delving in head first. So maybe last question before we wrap, but following on from this, right? So Starbucks is kind of delving in. Others have also, like you said, Nike, a bit of Pepsi, Bud Light, Time, et cetera, right? What do you think is the next steps from there? What do you think that curve is going to look like for Web 2 brands? And then also, where do you think Web 3 is going to be going in general? Do you think it's going to merge a little bit, and some Web 3 brands are going to start to look like Web 2 brands, and vice versa? Where do you think it's going in the next, let's say 2023, and then maybe a little bit beyond that?
Yeah, I think one, we're already seeing from the Starbucks launch and what we've put out with Odyssey, we're already getting a ton of inbound at Form 3 from brands that want to do something similar, right? So I think the fear is that, they're going to have to build something as robust or as committed as a Dot Swoosh or a Nike. And I think what we're going to try to do over the next year is kind of build a platform that brands can come and collaborate on in kind of like a dip your toe in type of way, in where Forum 3 is becoming it. Forum 3 is the platform to do it, where we're going to provide the utility, where, so because part of this is these, as we've talked about many times in the space, is you launch something like this and it's a forever on type of thing, right? But if there's a facilitator in the middle that's being the value adder, right, like the configurator, it allows more brands to kind of come in, test the waters, not learn how to do this well and correctly, and not just do something that doesn't feel genuine. So that's what we're going to be doing at Form 3. But I think because of that, you're starting to see, we're getting tons of inbound of brands that want to do stuff like this, because I think they're starting to see that it is a customer engagement model. It is this next generation loyalty play. It's an attention / content play. And I think that's where it's headed. I also think you're going to see over the next, year, 2 years, 3 years, it's kind of a CRM tool, right? In the sense that you're building an advertising tool. I think it will look like in the future as well, where you think about what a cookie is in Web 2 and on a website, right? You're going to a website and they're tagging that you've been there, and then there's all these algorithms and stuff that kind of market to you because of that. But when you start to think about what holding these NFTs in your wallet says about you and how public it can be, right? Where it's NFTs are almost like this permanent cookie, right? If you're holding it in your wallet, you've taken a proof of action that says something about you, right? And so you're going to be able to be engaged with in a whole different way, that is much more sticky, much more impactful, much more personalized. So I think that's where you're going from a sales and marketing perspective as well. But I do think that there's still so much room for the profile picture type of aspect of this as well, because all these brands like a Forum 3 or can use their own tokens to build their own communities. And you're going to see these things pull off these Venn diagrams of brands and communities, right? And so, and they become these social signals that they're part of this community. And so I think that's not going away. I mean, are we going to see, 100th Bored Apes? Maybe a new version of that, maybe not, but that part of it isn't going away either. So that's a long-winded way of saying a lot of different things, but I think it covers the sales and marketing, it covers the community, it covers, the data piece of it as well.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And this was just an absolutely excellent conversation. I hope everybody listening live just really enjoyed it. Those listening on recorded as well. For numbers therapy moving into 2023, as mentioned, this is intended to be foundational. We're going to try to very intentionally merge more Web 2 into this. just because we're going to see that crossover happen. And as MVHQ, of course, right? The goal, we are in MVHQ, some of the leading folks in here who have experienced these things firsthand, and maybe a little bit more risk taking as well as a result of things. So, formally, informally, otherwise, right? We're kind of stewards to the Web 2 folks to be able to get into the world. And so Starbucks having 20 plus million folks potentially that can get into the world, obviously a great opportunity. So we'll be seeing more of that certainly going into 2023. It's going to be awesome. A lot of developments and changes happening. And I just want to take a second also to say, not just to you, Bunchu, for coming on. So thank you so much for laying that foundation. But to the audience and everybody that's listened throughout 2022, super, super appreciative of everybody being engaged and giving feedback and all those sorts of things. Could not have gotten to episode 32 without everybody, without our audience and the community and all those things. And super excited for 2023. So thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the holidays, and we'll see everybody back in 2023. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.